Good morning, everybody. It's so nice to have you here. My name is Karen Waldman, and I am a co-president of the Women of Reform Judaism of the Temple in Louisville, Kentucky. Welcome to our annual Interfaith Coffee. We have been doing this coffee for decades, and you're going to hear this more than once, but next year we're hoping to have you back in person with us to enjoy a fun and educational program from our clergy and a wonderful breakfast buffet as always. Now I'd like to introduce you to our other co-president, Sarah Harlan.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Sarah Harlan, co-president with Karen Waldman of Women of Reform Judaism, aka Sisterhood, here at the Temple. We're delighted and honored that you're spending the morning with us, and we're only sorry that we don't have our usual sumptuous display of breakfast and dessert treats to share with you. And at the risk of giving myself a kinahura, more on that later, I'm going to say the same thing I did last year. Next year, in person. I'm fortunate to be able, pardon me one second. Karen, can you do me a big favor and bring me my mouse? I apologize, everybody. I'm having some technical difficulties. Thank you. I'm fortunate to be able to count both of our senior rabbis as work colleagues, so I'm delighted to be able to introduce them to you. Rabbi David is the head of adult education, the B'nai Mitzvah training program at the Temple, acts as liaison to the Temple Religious and Hebrew School and other committees, teaches 7th and 8th grade Hebrew school, and created and teaches in our Temple Scholars program. Rabbi David has dual American and Israeli citizenship, and for 4 years served in the paratroopers unit of the Israel Defense Forces. A graduate of Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in Jerusalem, where he received his Master of Arts in Jewish Studies, Rabbi David was ordained in 1994. He received a Master of Arts in Jewish Philosophy from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in 1993. His undergraduate career was also spent at Hebrew University, where he majored in Jewish philosophy and graduated in 1990. Rabbi Rapport has served our congregation since 1988. He teaches in a variety of adult education classes, as well as teaching the religious school's 6th grade class, the Temple Confirmation class, and a host of popular electives at the High School of Jewish Studies, and works closely with many B'nai Mitzvah students. Each summer, he works with Jewish children at Goldman Union Camp Institute in Zionsville, Indiana. Rabbi Rapport oversees many congregational programs, including serving as rabbinic liaison for WRJ Sisterhood, among others. Rabbi Rapport received his PhD in American Jewish History in 1988 from Washington University in St. Louis, and a Master of Arts in History also from WashU in 1986. A graduate of the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, Rabbi Rapport was ordained in June of 1984. He received his Master of Arts in Hebrew Letters from the Los Angeles campus of HUC, prior to which he spent a full year in Israel at the college's campus in Jerusalem. Just a heads up, Rabbi Rapport is on an airplane at the moment on a special mission to Kvel over his grandson. Again, more on that later. So he won't be able to answer questions, but if you do have any questions for Rabbi David, please put them in the chat. It is now my honor to welcome our first speaker this morning, Rabbi David.
Good morning, everyone. So wonderful to have you here virtually at our temple here in Louisville, Kentucky. And I hope and pray that next year we will all be here in person, enjoying the wonderful baked goods that our wonderful Women of Reform Judaism enjoy so much to prepare for everyone who participates in the Interfaith Coffee every year at February here at the temple. My name is Rabbi David Ariel Joel. I've been with the temple for the past 20 years. I'm a senior rabbi here at the temple, and it's my pleasure to speak to you today about the beauty of the Hebrew language. I grew up with Hebrew, so obviously I am biased. I think it's the easiest language in the world to learn because everyone I know spoke it when they were 2 years old. English is much harder. It took me so many years to learn how to speak English. But there's something more about Hebrew. Hebrew, in my biased opinion, is the most beautiful language in the world. It's called, in Hebrew, Lashon HaKodesh, means the sacred tongue. It's because God spoke to Moses and to other prophets in Hebrew. If you read the Hebrew Bible and it was written in Hebrew, English is just a translation, no offense to everyone or to anyone. God speaks Hebrew. God speaks to the people of Israel. God gives the 2 tablets of covenant that we call here in America, the 10 Commandments, in Hebrew. Hebrew is the sacred tongue. And it's not only that. You know, English is so clear, is so accurate. There's more than 1 million words in the English language, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary. And this is why you can say exactly what you mean. And when you read words in English, you know exactly what the person who wrote them meant. When you hear someone speaking in English, you know exactly what they want to tell you. Hebrew has less than 100,000 words. That's less than 10% of what the English language has. That means that when I read something, I have the ability to bring into it what I want to read in it. It's very hard to write exactly what you want to say or to say exactly what you want to say in the Hebrew language. This is why it's a multi-layer language. Every word in Hebrew means more or less 10 words in English. On top of that, every word in Hebrew has a root. That means every word, every name means something. It's not the same in English. My name is David. What does that mean in English? Well, you could say it's after King David or after some David that you know, but the word itself doesn't mean anything. In Hebrew, David, which is pronounced David, means also uncle. It means also lover. It obviously also means King David. So every word and every name and everything you say in Hebrew carries a meaning. And a lot of words also carry a story. I'm going to give you a few examples and try and teach you a few words in the beautiful Hebrew language. So our first words will be ish, isha, esh. That sounds kind of like the same, right? Ish, isha, esh. They all come from the same root. They all are actually spelled almost the same way. 2 letters are in each one of those words. And in English, they mean men, woman, fire. Well, men and women are spelled almost the same and are connected, but what does fire have there? And then there's a 4th word that I want to teach you, and that is Yah, which means Adonai, which is the name of our God. Usually it's translated as the Lord, but it's actually Adonai, which is the secret name, the name that we don't know how to pronounce, of Adonai, our God. So what story is told there? Well, we all read in the book of Genesis how God creates the first human being, places that human being in the Garden of Eden, and we read in the story of how God created that first human being, that God kind of like a sculpture shaped the first human being and then breathed into that human being the breath of God. So our soul, our essence, is not how we're shaped, but the breath of the divine that is in us. That's what makes us, by the way, in the image of God. Now, God breathes fire. So in every human being is the fire of God. When I say it in English, the words don't really tell the story. But in Hebrew, we have esh, meaning fire. We have ish, that is made from the same root, just as fire is, and that means men. Ish means men. And we have isha, meaning woman or female, that is also made from the same root. But in the word isha, there's also the two letters that if you put them aside, they mean Adonai, our God. They mean the Lord. So all of a sudden, the words themselves tell the story of how God placed the first human being in the Garden of Eden, and before that shaped the first human being and breathed in that human being the breath of the divine fire that is our soul till today. In English, you can replace the words that stand for men and women, but not in Hebrew, because then you will miss the story that comes there in the words of the Torah, in the words of the sacred Bible. Now, since we're dealing with words of Torah, with sacred words that come from our Holy Bible, I thought to say something about the way we bless Adonai, our God, when we study Torah together. We say, blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe. That's not part of that. That's every blessing says that. And then we say that commanded us, la'asok b'divrei Torah, which means la'asok is usually translated as to study or to engage ourselves. Very bad translation, but that's the problem of translating from one language to the other. And divrei Torah, that's easy with words of Torah. You would think that before study you would say, thank you, God, for commanding me to study words of Torah, but we say la'asok, which actually doesn't mean to engage or to study. It means business. We're making Torah our business. That cannot even be translated. That's why in every translation it's la'asok b'divrei Torah. And now we have just a common mistake in translation that I wanted to use this wonderful opportunity given to me by the Women of Reform Judaism to correct, and that is what in English we call the Ten Commandments. In Hebrew we call it either the two tablets of covenant, but really the name that is in the Torah, and the Torah was written in Hebrew, not in English, is Aseret HaDibrot. Sometimes Aseret HaDvarim, but usually Aseret HaDibrot. What does that mean? That means the 10 statements. Now, when you think about it, that's a much more accurate way to describe the two tablets of covenant. Do you remember the commandments that are in what we call the 10 commandments? The first one is, I am Adonai our God. I am Adonai your God, who let you out from Egypt to be your God. How is that a commandment? This is just Adonai our God introducing God itself to us. That's not a commandment. Obviously, some of the other statements there are commandments like thou shalt not kill or thou shalt not steal, or the hardest one, the one that I can never follow, thou shalt not covet. That means you're not supposed to be jealous of anyone. But those are real commandments. But I am Adonai your God, that's not a commandment. That's why don't call it anymore the 10 Commandments. I do that mistake too, I have to say, when I speak in English, but never in Hebrew. It's always Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 statements, or if you're more into slang, the 10 thingies or things or whatever. And then our name. We are called the people of Israel. Sometimes we're called the children of Jacob. Sometimes we're called the children of Israel. Sometimes we call the house of Jacob. But mostly we're called Israel. That's also the name of the Jewish state, the state of Israel. Those names have a tremendous meaning. If you remember in the Torah, in the book of Genesis, Jacob has a dream, and in his dream he fights a divine being, and he forces that divine being to bless him. And instead of the blessing, that divine being changes the name of Jacob from Jacob to Israel. Doesn't sound like a blessing, really. It's a huge blessing. What does Jacob mean? Yaakov in Hebrew comes from the root akev. That could be following. And he got the name from the story about how he fought in the womb with his brother Esau. And Esau came in first. Jacob wanted to stop him, so he held the heel of Esau. So he's the one following Esau. He's the second. He's not the first. That haunts him for the rest of his life. So Jacob means a follower, not in a good way, but it means also something else. Akov means crooked. The prophet Isaiah says one day the akov, the crooked, will become straight, will become a mishor. So Jacob means the crooked one. Nobody wants to be called that. I apologize in advance if your name is Jacob or if you have a loved one, Jacob. My brother whom I loved is called Jacob. My grandfather of blessed memory was called Jacob. Nothing against the name. But Jacob means crooked. Jacob also means deceitful, someone who's not honest. Now, what does Israel mean? Israel. It can be read as Yashar El, which means honest with God. So it could be that the blessing is that from a crooked, deceitful, not an honest person, the divine being, the messenger of Adonai our God, is making Jacob and is blessing him that he would stop being that deceitful persona and will become an honest person, someone who's straight with other human beings and with God. It could be also read as Sarael, which means to accept the rule of Adonai our God, to accept the yoke of the commandments of Adonai our God. It also is understood, and that's in most translation, someone who struggles with God. And we believe that it's our destiny as the people of Israel to struggle with the divine truth. I told you that in the early words about the beautiful Hebrew language. Every word can mean 10 things. That means that we struggle with the sacred scriptures all our lives, finding the divine presence in the words of Adonai our God in the Torah, and struggle to make it meaningful for us. And then, do I still have time? So then we have Kiddushin and Chatuna. Doesn't sound the same thing. So in English, when you get married, you have a wedding, right? And you call it a wedding or a marriage or anything like that. It's always very nice. In Hebrew, we have something else. Chatuna would be the translation of marriage or wedding. Kiddushin is the Jewish ceremony that you have when you get married. It means to become consecrated to each other. It means to sanctify the relationship. It means that when I get married to my partner, my soulmate, and I become a unit. You know, in COVID-19 words, we could say we become a capsule. We are now isolated from the world and sacred to each other, consecrated to each other. This is why the relationship becomes holy. That's what it means to get married. It's not an agreement. It's not some legal document. It's something that comes with sacredness and holiness. And last but not least, there are two ways to say my spouse or my husband in Hebrew. One is ishi, my human being, my soulmate, my partner. The other one is Ba'ali, which means my master. Unfortunately, that's the biblical word for an husband. Ba'ali means the master, because in the Bible, it was not an egalitarian or an equal or a just word. But today, the modern Hebrew language has made it into ishi. I wanted to conclude with how the modern Hebrew is reinterpreting the ancient Hebrew in order to make our world better, more egalitarian, and more equal. Thank you very much. Continue to enjoy the Hebrew language and continue to enjoy the beauty of the Hebrew language. And thanks, the Women of Reform Judaism.
Hello, my name is Rabbi Rapport, and today I'll be teaching you Yiddish words from the Jewish soul. Yiddish is the language of the Jewish people from Eastern Europe and Western Europe, from the times when we lived in ghettos and shtetls. Not the language of the Bible or the prayer book, but rather the language of the home and the street. It was the common language of the Jewish people which we shared across lines. It's a crazy language that's made of mostly German, but also Polish, words of Hebrew. It's all kind of moshed together like a soup. But it served us well for hundreds of years. Very few people, Jews in the United States, speak Yiddish today, but there's certain words that have lived on because somehow they've taken a part of our soul, and sometimes because there isn't an English word that actually expresses what they mean. Chutzpah. This one comes with a joke. The joke's kind of dark, but that's also Jewish. So a bubby, a grandmother, is at the beach with her bubula, her grandson. She's playing in the sand, they're having a lovely time, and suddenly this huge wave comes along and it sweeps up bubula and he disappears. She screams, "Oy vey!" And then she looks up to heaven and she cries out to God to save her grandchild, and on the very next wave, swoosh, bubula's plop right back down where he was. It's a miracle, she thinks for a second. And then she looks up and says, "He had a hat?" That's chutzpah. There isn't really a translation of the word. It means courage or assertiveness or a sense of the self which says, if you don't ask, you're not going to get. But chutzpah is like an essential character of the Jewish soul. To have chutzpah means to stand up for yourself, to stand up for your people. It means in more ways than it can be translated. If you look up in the dictionary for the word chutzpah, it'll tell you it means chutzpah. Oy vey is mir, also from our story. Oy is like a visceral statement of like, oh my God. Oy vey, that's like, oh my pain, and you're sharing that sort of moment of pain in your heart. Oy vey is mir is when things are really bad. Oh, my pain, it's the pain I have. And sometimes if things are really bad, you get an oy gewalt, which is like a screaming cry. All these words are the expression of people that had plenty of things to say oy about, to be perfectly honest. Sadness and pain are not unfamiliar to the Jewish people, and it's fascinating to me of all the Hebrew words and Yiddish words that we use commonly together, oy is sort of not only lived itself into the soul of the Jewish people, but it's found its way out into the broader population as well. Bubula, who's also in the story. Bubula is an expression of endearment. It doesn't just, it literally means baby, but it doesn't just mean a baby. And it's not necessarily a baby boy or a baby girl. It's the sort of word for baby that you use for your grandchildren. Not your children because you don't love them that much. Grandchildren, that's what you really love. And it's this sweetness that's applied to young people in general. Jews are historically and famously obsessive about our children. It's part of the essential value of the Jewish people to raise ourselves up the next generation. Jews are not a proselytizing people. We don't seek converts in the active sense. We raise, educate, and inspire our children and our grandchildren to live out these values in their own lives. So when you say bubula, it comes kind of with a stroke on the head. It's meant to have kind of a sweetness to it. And the best way I can explain this, besides the story about bubula on the beach, is the story I read about a young girl just after the Second World War, growing up in Skokie near Chicago, which was a large Jewish neighborhood and the largest actual neighborhood anywhere in the world of Holocaust survivors. And as a young girl in the neighborhood, she was kind of unique because Most of the people were either single or couples, mostly older than her parents, and there weren't a lot of children in the neighborhood. And she describes sort of the experience of like walking down the streets in this Jewish neighborhood, surrounded by all these people who were survivors of the Holocaust, and how everyone would kind of come up and stroke her on the head and call her bubula. Or sort of, embrace her or pat her or touch her. She said that she was like the mezuzah, the post in the little box on the doorpost that you kiss as you're leaving your home. She was like the mezuzah for the whole community, because she was like the child of the whole community, because so many of them couldn't have children or had lost children, and they gathered this bubula into their heart. This sense that all of our children are all of our children. That's a deep and abiding Jewish value. Schmooze. We're schmoozing right now. Schmoozing literally means talking, but it's not like talking in the Western sense of the word talking. Particularly among men in America, the word talking usually, or communication, usually refers to the exchange of information of value. So when you're talking to someone, the point of the conversation is the information that can be gleaned from it in order to be able to know or do something of value. That's not schmoozing. Schmoozing is like talking as an art. It's like talking for the sake of talking. A schmoozer is the kind of person who's comfortable in social settings and enjoys telling stories and sharing time together. A good schmooze with a friend is sometimes what you need to get something off your chest. It's not really about conveying the information, it's about the relationship that's built in the conversation. Jews are schmoozers. Okay, schmoozing is like part of what we do. I honestly, I shouldn't say this, but I honestly think that most of the people who come to services, particularly in the days before COVID, when we would have large gatherings, they came for the before and the after as much as they came for the services themselves, because it was the schmoozing with the friends back and forth that reminded them of their sense of community, of their sense of belonging, and of their reason for being there in the first place. Schmutz. Now this is a Jewish word, that sort of found its way from Yiddish into popular culture. I remember specifically there was an ad campaign for, I think it was Johnson & Johnson baby shampoo. There was a little boy sitting in the tub saying, "Schmutz," and looking at his hand. And I figured it'd become of age, because if you've made it into a television commercial, then Yiddish really has become the common person's language. A story about schmutz. But a young man who goes to a rabbi and says he wants to study Talmud. The young man says that he's always wanted to study Talmud and wondered if the rabbi could make time to be able to teach him Talmud. The rabbi said, "I'd love to teach you Talmud, but can I ask you, have you ever studied Torah before? Because I've never seen you at any of our classes here at the temple." The young man says, "No, I've never done Torah study before." He says, "Well, have you ever studied the Mishnah, which is the foundation upon which Talmud is established?" And the young man says, "No, but I'm a graduate of Columbia University. I have my master's degree from Wharton School. I'm sure I can learn anything you want to teach. So if you could just teach me Talmud, I'd be very happy." Well, the Rebbe said, "Tell you what, I'll give you a quiz. If you pass the quiz, then you can study Talmud with me. If not, maybe you'll come to one of my Torah classes." The young man laughed and said, "Okay, Rabbi, how many questions are going to be on the quiz?" The rabbi said, "One question." He said, "One question? Okay, I'll take the quiz." So the rabbi says, 2 men go down the same chimney. One comes out with his face all schmutzy, the other comes out with his face all clean. The one looks at the other and sees that his face is all dirty, and the other looks at the other and sees that his face is all clean. What will they do? And the young man says, "Well, obviously, the man with the dirty face will wash his face, so his face is all clean, and they'll go on with their work." And the rabbi says, "No." He says, "Well, what do you mean, no?" He says, "The one whose face is all schmutzy is looking at the one whose face is all clean, so he thinks his face is all clean. The one whose face is all clean is looking at the man whose face is all dirty, and he thinks, my face must be dirty. So the man with a clean face will wash his face." "Ah, okay, you got me," says the young man. "Tell you what, how about you ask me another question, and I'll see how I do now that I understand the way you're asking questions." The rabbi says, "You want another question?" He says, "Yes." He says, "Okay, here's your question. 2 men go down the same chimney. One comes out with his face all schmutzy, the other one comes out with his face all clean. Which one will wash his face?" The young man says, "I got this now. The one with the clean face will wash his face." He says, "No." "What do you mean, Rabbi, no?" He says, "No, you're wrong." He says, "How am I wrong?" He says, "Listen, the 2 men look at each other. The one looking at the clean face thinks his face is clean. The one looking at the dirty face thinks his face is dirty. When the one who's looking at the dirty face is washing his clean face, the one with the dirty face will wash his face too, because he'll think this is some sort of ritual that you do when you come down a chimney, so the two of them will wash their face. The young man laughs and says, I don't suppose you could give me another question. He said, you want another question? He says, sure, I'll give you one more question. Two men go down the same chimney. One comes out with his face all schmutzy. The other one comes out with his face all clean. Which one will wash his face? Now the young man's thinking. If he says the first man, he'll be wrong. If he says the second man, he'll be wrong. He says both. They'll both wash their face. The rabbi goes, wrong. He says, how can I be wrong? He says, you're wrong. It's a stupid question. How could two men come down the same chimney and one have his face all dirty and the other have his face all clean? They'd either both have their face dirty or they either both have their face clean. It's a klutz kasha, which means it's a silly question. Now, the point of that story, not just to elucidate the word schmutz, which means grime or dirt, is to teach you that Jewish thinking is not always linear. It doesn't always follow the usual patterns of logic and reason. And that leads us to our next word, which is a Yiddish cup. A Yiddish cup literally means a Jewish head. A Jewish head means a certain kind of wisdom. It's not necessarily book learning. It's not necessarily like street smarts. It's sort of the kind of Jewish understanding of the world that helps you get out of difficult situations and that makes you wise in the practical sense of like getting along. A Yiddish cup is a compliment usually. Sometimes it's said sarcastically, but someone who's got a good Yiddish cup is the sort of person you'd want advice from in a difficult situation. Classic story about a Yiddish cup. A rabbi, this is back in the old country, maybe 150 years ago. He's worked very hard. He's a very learned man. To be able to travel, it was very difficult with Jews living in separated ghettos or shtetls, communities where only Jews were allowed to live, for them to be able to travel. And he worked for some time to get travel papers to be able to go to Moscow, to the great city of Moscow, to visit with some other rabbis and to do some study. So he was very excited and pleased, and he's getting on the train and he's heading to Moscow. And after the first stop, the young man comes and sits down next to him. Nice looking young man. He's sitting there, he's looking at the young man. He goes, so, who could this be? He says in his head. He doesn't look like a peasant. He's kind of a nice person. He seems to be pretty well put together. He does look kind of Jewish. We're in a Jewish district. We got on. Most of the people who live here are Jewish. He must be Jewish. But if he's Jewish, how's he getting on this train? Because it took me forever to get the papers to be able to go on this train to get to Moscow. So he must be from the district, and he's going where? Well, maybe there's a small town outside of Moscow. It's a Jewish town. Maybe he's going there. Okay, he's going there. So if he's going there on the train with me, then he's probably going there to see some of the Jewish people there. There's not that many Jewish people. There's really only two big families, the Silvermans and the Cohens. So he could be going to see the Silvermans, but they're really nasty people, and he seems like a nice person. So probably he's not going to see the Silvermans. Probably he's going to see the Cohens. He must be one of the Cohens. Okay, so if he's one of the Cohens, as I recall, only had like daughters. Sarah and Esther, so he must be married or engaged to either Sarah or Esther. They were nice girls. So I remember his name, his name was Kovitz, right, okay, so he must be Kovitz. So he's coming from a faraway place. Where did this train come from? This train came from Budapest. He's coming from Budapest. He's living in Budapest. He seems to be pretty successful, scholar of some kind. He has a briefcase. Probably he teaches at the yeshiva there. Maybe he has an advanced degree. So he must be Dr. Kovitz. So he turns to the man and says, Dr. Kovitz, would you mind if I open the window? And he says, that'd be fine. How did you know my name? And the rabbi said, well, it was obvious. That's a Yiddish code. Being able to figure out not just the practical situation, but the Jewish situation and the Jewish geography sense of the word, by which I mean, knowing people and places and drawing things together in a way that might be helpful. That's a Yiddish code. Mishpocha. Everything's about mishpocha. Those stories, they were all about mishpocha. This is about mishpocha too. Mishpocha is from a Hebrew word. It's mishpacha in Hebrew. It means family, but this mishpocha means so much more. Mishpocha means your extended family, by which I mean extended and extended and extended family. If you have cousins, that's only like one ring. your second cousin, your third cousin once removed, your aunt so-and-so, who's really not really an aunt, but she's, sort of been such a close friend of the family that she's been gathered into the mishpacha. The word mishpacha has come to mean sort of like community in the broad sense of the word. There was a famous ad campaign, Chase Bank. It was, I think in the 1980s or 90s. And it was, you have a friend at Chase Bank. And the Bank of Israel, Bank Leumi l'Israel, the Bank of Israel had a counter ad that said, you may have a friend at Chase, but you've got mishpacha here, okay? Which was their way of saying, your family will take good care of you. That's what the word mishpacha means. It's not just that you happen to be related, but your family will take care of you. This is a word that the English language needs. It's one of those members of the family, mochatonim. Your mochatonim are your daughter or your son's in-laws. So like, if you have a child and they get married and they have a father-in-law and a mother-in-law, then there's a word for that in English, not really, but we've made up the word mother-in-law, father-in-law, that explains the relationship between the person you married and their parents. Mochatonim is the relationship between, or the word for, my daughter's father and mother-in-law. So we don't have a word for that because I guess we don't think about them as family, but they're part of the mishpacha. It's part of the basic nature of the family that if you have a grandchild in common, you're a family, okay? And you have a common interest in the grandchild and in your children and your children's spouses who are also your children. So a mochatonista or a mochatonester is your mother-in-law, your child's mother-in-law or father-in-law, and together they make mochatonim. Now, if we have a word for that in English, we probably have closer families. Schlep. Schlep is a word that's very useful. It's usually presented in sort of the negative form. Schlep means to drag or lug something. Sort of like, the word lug, which suggests something negative, but, lug is the root of the word luggage, which you're lugging from place to place whenever you travel. So if you schlep something, it means you're sort of like dragging it on the ground, and it usually has this sort of aggravated sense of you're schlepping this along with you, like baggage in the sense of you're carrying a lot of baggage, that kind of use of the word. A schlepper is a person who schleps things. So that's usually the negative aspect of the word. It means that you're the kind of person who has a job where you have to do hard labor, that you're dragging or lifting or carrying or things like that. And it's usually not a job that you want for your children or your grandchildren, that they shouldn't just be a schlepper. On the other hand, the word schlep can have holy context because the first use of the word schlep in literature is actually in one of the oldest machzors or high holiday prayer books, because prayer books had become so large because the original prayer books had prayers for the Sabbath and the weekdays and the holy days and the festivals and Passover, and there was all one book called the Machzor, and it was so large that not everyone had one. There was just one that was read from the synagogue. And in one of these early prayer books from around the 9th century, there's a prayer, a special prayer, for those who schlep the prayer book to temple, because without them, we wouldn't be able to have services. So schlepping can also be kind of like holy work. And somewhere in between there is this concept of it all depends on why you're schlepping. If you're schlepping because it's your job and it's all you can do and it's a schlep to do it, you can be used as an adjective that way. If it's a schlep to do it, then it's work, then it's hard. But if I schlep for you, I'd schlep. I carry this for you, I help you, I do the hard work for you, then it's an act of love. Schlep. Nachas. Nachas is an indescribable thing, but it's a joy. It literally means joy, but it's a particular kind of joy. It's the joy you find from your children or your friends or your community. When someone does something really wonderful and you actually feel the joy from their accomplishment, it's an empathetic kind of a bond. You actually feel wonderful because someone someone you love, someone who's a part of your community did something great. The phrase is you shep nachas, you gather in nachas when that happens. And this is a really Jewish thing, because Jews are always sort of keeping track of like how many Nobel Prize winners are in the Jewish community, and political accomplishments, sports accomplishments, academic accomplishments, anything, any accomplishment, we're proud. And if it's someone Jewish, we're even more proud. And if it's actually someone related to us, like our grandchildren or our children, then it's the ultimate nachas. It's a part of what it means to be Jewish, to be part of a community, and to feel that sense of a community viscerally, and to really recognize that our joys are all shared. That's nachas. This is a shanda. Shanda is kind of the opposite of nachas. A shanda is the shame you feel, viscerally, when someone in the Jewish community does something that's not something worthy of nachas, that's something horrible. And when it's associated with anyone who's Jewish, one Jew, the rest of the Jewish community kind of feels that pain. When something painful happens to someone Jewish, we feel the pain. When something joyous happens to someone Jewish, we share the joy. And when something, embarrassing or tragic happens, there's this sense of, oh, it's a shanda. It's a terrible thing for the community at large. So that's shanda. Anash. This has been anash. I haven't been able to give you the whole meal. An entire lesson on Yiddish would be like any other language, and probably more to be able to learn. But this has been a little nosh, a taste. There's a restaurant down the street called Nushnash, which is run by a Persian man who loves the Jewish community, and he's kind of playing on that. But anash is like a classically Jewish thing. Jewish food, it means everything, and it's a lot of the cultures sharing Jewish food, whether it's at holidays or Sabbath or with family. But there's also this sort of familial sense, usually attributed to the Jewish mother, but in our family, it was my wife's father who was the Jewish mother with food, making chicken soup when you're sick, and giving you an extra helping, making sure you shouldn't starve. The appropriate way to feed a person is to put it on their plate and then ask if they want it, that kind of a food. So meals are like a huge thing. And ceremonial meals that are associated with the holidays are a huge thing, and we talk about them and celebrate them a lot. But anash is like, it's the meal in between the meal. It's like you should never go hungry. It's just a little taste. You'll have, it's sort of like hobbits who have like second breakfast. You shouldn't have any long period of time when you're not eating. A little something for the road, a little taste. And this has been a little taste of Yiddish. A little nosh. It'll kind of whet your appetite. Maybe you'll learn some more. Nosh. This is our last word. It's the word mensch. And this is something I hope for you and for all those people you love. A mensch, in German, the word mensch means a person or a man specifically. But in Yiddish, mensch means something much deeper entirely. There's a famous adage, in a place where there are no people, strive to be a person, which makes no sense at all unless you know that the word there really doesn't mean person, it means mensch. In a place where there's no mention, strive to be a mensch. If you find yourself in a place where people aren't acting rightly, justly, fairly, they're not caring about other human beings, then they're not mentioned. They may be human beings, physical human beings, but they're not acting in a humane way. A mensch is like the difference between human and humane. They're related, obviously, but the word humane means something deeper. If you're a humanitarian, you care about other people. That's a mensch. If you're willing to stand up for your own people and for other people in need, that's a mensch. If you're willing to do the things that need to be done in order to build a just and righteous community, then you're a mensch and you're an example to other mensch. So that's my wish for you, our last word. May you always be a mensch.
So thank you everyone again for joining us. We have a few questions for Rabbi David. First, can you talk a little bit about gematria?
Oh. Gematria is
using the fact that the Hebrew letters also carry a numeric value. So let's say you take a name. Okay, I'll pick my name again. My name is David in Hebrew, David in English. So it's made out of 3 letters, Daled, Vav, Daled. Daled is worth 4, Vav is worth 6, and Daled again is worth 4. So together, if I do the math correctly, it's 14. And then you try to put another meaning into that, and you say, okay, I'm taking now 2 letters that also come out as 14. I wasn't prepped for this question, so otherwise I would make something that would make me look like really nice, that my name means, I don't know, a saint or something, but I didn't prepare, so I can't think of something, but that's what people do. There are rabbis and preachers that will take the name of a wedding couple that they're officiating in their wedding, and they would say that actually if you take the names together and do the numeric value, it means and they would live happily ever after or something nice like that. And you can do that. You can do with the numbers, by the way, whatever you want. It's almost like statistics. You can play with the numbers and do whatever you want and come out with whatever meaning that you want to do. But there are some rabbis that love that.
Thanks, and that's also how we get the special meaning of the number 18 in Judaism, right?
Yes, so the number 18 is also the 2 letters Chet and Yud, which means life, Chai. So if you get a wedding gift from a Jewish person and all of a sudden you get, I don't know, $36 or hopefully $3,600, then you don't know why 36, why not 35 or 40? That's because 36 is twice high, so they're offering you that you will have a very long life. To give just a 1 high, that means actually that you want to give the minimum, so twice would be a nicer thing.
And then, Hebrew doesn't have any vowels, or at least in the Torah, so can you just talk a little bit about how children learn to read, how they know what the right vowel sound is?
So it's different between the US and Israel in that sense. Here at our religious school or Hebrew school, we do not teach our students how to read without vowels, except for their Torah portion in their bar and bat mitzvah, and they simply remember the sounds and the vowels by heart, that they don't have such a long portion. But in Israel, where I grew up, in 1st grade you learn the letters and the vowels, and then from 2nd grade on you read without the vowels. Israeli newspapers, Israeli books, except for children books, are without vowels. So the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, is obviously with vowels because it's sacred words and you want to pronounce them exactly as they are. But when you read the newspaper, you realize what the word would mean from the context. I mean, in my part, I gave you an example how some words can have a different sound and a different meaning, even though they're spelled the same. For instance, in this week Torah portion, we end the book of Exodus by saying that Moses finished the work of the tabernacle, and Moses could not enter the tabernacle because the glory of God filled the tabernacle. And the same word means both things. So it's all about how the vowels are there. I mean, not the same word, the same letters mean the same thing. It's all about the vowels there that play, and as someone that when Hebrew becomes the language that you speak fluently, or that it's your what's called, at least in Hebrew, your mother's tongue, that then you just know from the context what the words are. And probably in your mind, like when I read a book and when I read fiction, I only read Hebrew because it's for pleasure. Or when I read the Israeli daily newspapers, I obviously, as most people, I make up the sounds in my mind, And probably I'm getting some of them wrong, but from the context, I'm not getting the words wrong. So that's how you learn.
One more question. Is there a Hebrew word that's missing? Sort of like a word that, something that you wish there was a word for in Hebrew?
You should have given me those questions ahead of time. I would maybe Google the Hebrew missing word or something like that. Obviously, it's like that they're saying that in Alaska they have 100 words for the snow, or in Hebrew we have I'm trying to think of something that we have words that in English you don't have to. They say that like in some cultures you have a lot of words for camels. I'll give you an example. I came to America and I found out that living in Kentucky, that horses has a lot of, that you have a lot of names for horses. In Hebrew, there is either a male horse or a female horse. You don't, that's it. You don't get in between. But all of a sudden, in Kentucky, we have a few words for there. I don't feel the need for more words for horses in Hebrew. I'm trying to think, I wish there were more words in Hebrew for the different kinds of rain, because we really need more water and more rain in Israel, so that would be a good thing. We have a word for rain, and we have a word for the first rain of the year and the last rain of the year. Probably in Kentucky we don't, because it never stops raining. I mean, you can plan a wedding in May, June, July, or August outside, and you don't know if you'll have rain or not. In Israel, fortunately or unfortunately, you plan an event outside May, June, July, August, you're 100% sure that it's not going to rain. Never does. We have like 6 months a year in Israel with no rain, and I wish we would have more rain. So maybe the good thing for Israel would have been that we wouldn't have a word for the first rain of the year and a word for the last rain of the year, but just many words for rain describing all the water that we should get.
Great,
thank you, and hope to see you in person next year.
Indeed. We are looking forward. I want everyone to mark their calendars now, for, I don't have the exact Monday in February, but February of 2023. Again, I know Rabbi Rapport didn't mention this word, but I hope to not give myself a kinahura, which is a jinx in Yiddish. But we look forward to seeing everyone in person when we can bring you in and we can enjoy a delightful breakfast together and share some more wonderful learning together as a community. Thank you for joining us today.